Artificial intelligence has become one of the hottest topics in business. Many companies are eager to harness its power to streamline operations, personalize customer experiences, and gain a competitive edge. But is AI always the right solution? Welcome to the Conversologist show, where we dive into the art and science of conversations in the digital space. We know that technology can be a powerful enabler, but communication and emotional connection still need to be at the core. I'm your host, Jan Mayer, and I invite you to converse with us. This episode, I'm excited about this, we'll explore when it makes sense to deploy AI and when a simpler, dumb system might actually be the smarter choice. Our guest today to share his thoughts is Sam Pierre-Gilles, co-founder of marketing agency Aspire Digital Online and editor-in-chief at the AI Product Report. So with a background in product management, Sam is an expert in applying AI and automation to elevate customer experiences. Thank you for joining us, Sam. Hello, hello.
Hello, hello. It's a pleasure to see you.
Just for our listeners, because I'm obviously in New Zealand,
Mhm.
where are you at exactly, Sam, in the world?
So I'm based in Montreal, Canada.
Let's start with something simple: dumb systems or non AI solutions versus smart AI solution. What's the difference? What does that mean?
The difference between the two is palpable. I'll start by defining the non-AI system because it's the one we're kind of used to the most across all kinds of industries, right? So you've got a set of rules that's defined by statistics or very particular logic that's been super prescribed by humans. And like these systems are meant to execute tasks exactly the way that we set them up to be. They don't necessarily deviate from the rules because we're the ones setting the rules. And so a lot of that behavior is extremely predictable based on how it's been programmed. A dumb system is something that you've created using rules, statistics, that you're using systems that are 100% humanly understandable. It's really getting to talk about AI, right? And what is really an AI powered solution? Ultimately, it's that at some segment of your larger use case, you're using a boatload of data that's been used to train this model, which could be, we'll call it machine learning solutions. So all of these technologies that pull in data, learn from it, and then make actions based on that or provide insights based on that falls under the umbrella of artificial intelligence because you have this mathematical model that gets exposed to a large amount of data. And all of this data, juvenile mathematical model, if you will. And gradually, this model builds its own understanding of the data it's been exposed to in its infancy. And so that translates to how it'll interact with the world, or in most contexts, is how it'll interact with the inputs and the outputs it's given. And so the difference between the two really also comes down to having to program new behavior into it by explicitly adding additional behavior versus feeding it new data on top of some of the things it's already seen of your original, let's say, training data, and trying to control the outcomes.
Is it safe to
Mhm.
say that an AI solution, or when you plug in some AI into a system, is it sort of like a machine brain in it trying to process everything as you mentioned versus a dumb system that we need more of 100% human brain to know?
There's some AI architectures that will start to learn from kind of those impressions. And so our rate of learning and our compute power is something where we're currently at technologically. And so, as much as we want to praise and be very impressed by the level of AI that we're currently working with, honestly, I'd say that it's is still very gated.
Of course, the human brain is great as always. Let's paint a picture for viewers. Maybe you can give us an example or two on what a simple based system versus an AI solution look like, solving one business problem or two.
Business problems, honestly, is they're the most comfortable ones to address with stuff like this as well, because when you think about it, I think a really good example is looking at recommender systems. And I know I'm jumping into a hairy topic already because it is source of quite a bit of AI research. So I'm jumping into it because it is one of those pieces that, in terms of product management, it's one of those pieces that has the huge ability to really just go with a kind of crawl, walk, run. I think a good example of a dumb system that is perfectly usable in the case of recommendations. You want to put more than one service in front of your customer as an opportunity for an upsell. And from the customer perspective, this is something we're already used to when it comes down to shopping on any of the large retailers that are online. And so the example of a dumb system in a case like that can be as simple as a pre-baked list of associations for the couple pilot web pages that you have that are going to have this feature. And if you want to go one step a little bit more intelligent, but still stay within the definition of a dumb system, is taking the time to look through your entire product pool and look at a statistic model of, well, what's the statistic probability that after purchase of product A, product B appears, right? And then you can pick the, let's say, five most probable out of that analysis and just present those. And so that's a good example that still fundamentally works and still serves its base purpose until you have enough data to actually make a smart AI driven solution for recommendations. Because there's quite a few times where a dumb system is the answer until you have enough data to actually be able to produce a semi reliable AI version of the exact same feature. When you realize that data, the volume of that data, the velocity of the growth of that data isn't what you need it to be, you might actually end up staying on a dumb system that'll serve the purpose for quite a long time.
That's an interesting point. I think a lot of companies or businesses don't realize it's all about the sample data, right? How much data is enough in order to transition or at least think about or plan an AI system versus the simple one? Is there like a number out there?
That's interesting you mentioned that. I think there's levels to it. There's an amount of level up you can actually do within your dumb system before you hit a point of what I would call minimally viable data to get into the AI of it all. Let's say you've got sub 10,000 rows of one specific isolated use case. I'm going to start with what I would call a more like task focused AI, and then we'll get into the rest of it after. And so with task focused AI, you want to train a custom model with your data specifically, and you want to get into it to teach it to, for example, output a very specific pattern. Let's say we stick to that recommendation engine example. You're going to need an amount of data just to start, right? You need some basic amount of transaction data to give you the clearest relationship between your input, which is the product being purchased, and your output being the products being recommended. And so at first, in order to collect any amount of transactional data, you need to, let's say, have your e-commerce page up and you need to start piping sales through it. You need a certain volume of sales. And then leveling that up into what I would call a viable statistic model from a arbitrary model where you just decide what the associations are. That's level 0. Level 1 is getting into that statistic model. So if you have a couple thousand, 10,000, kind of 5 digits amount of rows of individual transactions, you're looking at, okay, a statistic model might be something that's a bit more representative because I have a decent population. I can start sampling something that's a bit more reasonable from a statistics perspective to figure out, okay, well, what is the probability of ABC occurring in a large enough data set over a long enough period of time? And transitioning that from that level 1, as I would call it, into a full-blown AI system that's been trained as a recommender engine. Not only are you going to need what I would ballpark to be at least halfway up the six figures in terms of transactional data, you also need to feed more contextual data to the system in order for it to actually behave properly. Because a huge amount of contrast there in terms of context. And so there's a bunch of pre work that needs to go into having a lot of data, not just at the transactional level, but actually having a lot of data around what some would call your user persona, your buyer persona, even because sometimes the user and the buyer personas aren't the same. That's where we get into some of that contextual information that's so critical to get a true result that's to some extent semi-reliable, then be scaled out. You're looking at hundreds of thousands of transaction data plus hundreds of thousands of rows of customer behavior overall that you're pulling into the mix. And of course, the actual AI development steps around feature analysis are going to definitely be a bigger tell on which features you actually need. But the general rule of thumb is the more good data you have, the better.
Context, good data, personas, and all that. And another elephant in the room, it's all about privacy, right? The consumers want it to be personalized or experience to be personalized, and we'd love to have a personalized experience. However, there is that privacy side of things like, hang on, you know a lot about me. So it's just a comment. It's not really a question, but it is interesting because you're right. An AI system has to understand. I always say when you start an AI project, it starts off as a baby, so to speak, and you have to feed it
Absolutely.
and you have to teach it and so on. And if you don't have enough personal data, at least enough to say, hey, I understand who Sam is. And again, that's just the basics. Plus, then your behavior on what you buy, how you buy, frequency, and all that. That's another set of data, right?
I can speak to that a little bit and say that luckily enough, other than broad strokes geographic data, you can go a very long way while respecting the privacy of a lot of the users, which is such an interesting trade off, right? Because obviously, if we had every single one of my transactions, I'm thinking I shop on Amazon, sue me, occasionally. But yeah, if you took all of my Amazon transactions, you'd find that there's no reasonable rhyme or reason across what I'm looking at any given time because they're sporadic, because I'm practically never shopping twice for the same thing, because the topics that interest me on one day are different from the housewares I'm ordering on a different day. There are ways around that problem by creating these personas. And so looking at the rough group of people over here that are behaving a certain way, regardless of age, can be binned to some relative extent together over here. And so it's not a perfect way to match, but it's a way to get a very good approximation of personalization without necessarily having to dive too deep into PII. And that's where things get extra spicy, if you will, because the deeper you go into personally identifiable information, that PII I mentioned earlier, the more you can start customizing, the more things can get like what some would call kind of creepy. Like it gets well beyond the user experience that's expected and delighting a customer. You're now getting into the, let's say, your brother, whom you're connected to on Facebook, just had a baby, because I'm seeing a lot of baby hashtags come up in their search history. Let's put a lot of baby shower content in front of you. Now that's what I would say is a line, like a bridge too far by far. But there's still a lot you can do before you get to that point.
I'm just going to segue because we're talking about age now. I'm going to move into that topic. Older generation or elderly, do you think an AI solution is best for them? Or I know this is such a broad thing, so maybe an example might be good versus
Hmm.
a simpler system. What do you think?
I've actually had this conversation come up at my own marketing agency. So shout out to Aspire Digital Online. You can find us at myado.ca, barring the obligatory plug. Honestly, I think a good example of this is an ad campaign. An AI generated ad campaign versus something a little bit more traditional. I think a lot of it comes down to picking your channel carefully, picking your tech carefully, and knowing your customer carefully, more so intimately. And the reason why those three are so important when it comes down to the generational divide, if you want to really call it that, is that some things are okay, but some things get weird very quickly. I think a good example of this is looking at an AI generated content is something that quite a few TikTokers are going to be very comfortable with because this is something that's just kind of pervading the scene. It's something that there's quite a few entertaining elements that can come to it. And a lot of it comes from a place of, frankly, just exactly that entertainment. And so there are ways to present AI generated content in the form of entertainment that will be digestible to some extent by the older generation, so long as the context is provided. But when I think of my parents, they say, "Oh, I got this email. I don't trust it." It's like, is there a reason why? Oh, it reads just a little bit too formal for a human to have written this. I don't think it's real. And so I have a look at it, and what do you know? There's actually artifacting in the message, and this artifacting comes from someone who copy pasted it off of a text generator and sent it out. If you're gonna sell it, at least please like get the artifacting out of the way.
Yeah,
That's a conversation for another time.
it's another
But
episode probably. But anyway, yep.
yeah, that's a whole piece. But all this to say, I digress. When it comes down to generated content, it's really about knowing your channel, knowing your tech, and knowing your customers. People who are used to waking up on a Saturday morning to check their emails, the personal inbox for their newsletters, their everything else, that's fantastic. You need to go and think about reaching them at a spot that is comfortable for them. But at the same time, sending out a mass ad campaign with AI generated content specifically targeted to the elderly will probably leave them with a very uncanny, very uncomfortable feeling because technology has evolved so much from the initial stages that it was in, even I want to say 10, 15 years ago. Having to deal and being confronted with that level of change isn't something that's necessarily comfortable. And playing to someone's discomfort is a very professional way to have someone lose interest in what you're putting in front of them most of the time.
I was working with a digital marketer in a training session, and
Mhm.
we were looking at his boss. Okay, I can't name names, but his boss
No.
or his manager actually
Mhm.
said, "Hey, you know what? Let's use some AI video in our ad campaigns." And interestingly enough, when they did sort of an A/B test, real one versus an AI video, and it was the same one. It was just simply a person just saying a monologue or whatever the offer is. And he was like, "Oh, we had to put it down." There was a lot of engagement on the ad, which is kind of great if you think about it. However, it was all negative. They knew for sure it was an AI video. And that actually was more of, nah, you know what? I'm not good. I don't care what about your offer. I don't care about your business. The fact that you're using AI, an AI video or an AI generated video onto your like ad campaign, we're not going to buy from you. So that's
Mhm.
actually an interesting behavior and an interesting comment. It's like, and we
Well,
change it to the
there's
real one. It was okay.
a
Go ahead.
world of a difference. Yeah, there's
Yeah.
there's actually quite a bit that's interesting on that side because like AI's been, especially with the massive upsurge since the arrival of the LLMs on the market, the arrival of image generation, there's been so much in terms of points of contention around the ethics of the data you end up gathering. So that becomes a whole other branch that we can get into later. But nonetheless, from a human perspective, if it doesn't feel quite right, if it doesn't look quite real, because the technology is just not there yet, as much as it may be absolutely beautiful to someone who knows what it is, for someone who doesn't know what they're getting into, that may be extremely uncomfortable. It's the NVIDIA's eye hider, the eye contact hider for cameras. And so you film yourself kind of looking around doing things, and you can actually transplant essentially a digital artificially replicated versions of your own eyes that are looking at the camera the whole time while you may be actually eyes over looking at your notes. Technology like that is a little bit unsettling, but it's still what I would call like intelligent or creative masking of some human flaws. It's such a huge element to marketing, to advertisement. If we separate the use of AI in ad creation for, let's say, the copy, like the script, a scene montage with animated characters, you can really forcibly squeeze a lot of AI into your creative pipeline without necessarily rendering your users, your viewers, your target audience uncomfortable.
You just reminded me that eyes, the script actually has
Uh,
that in beta version, and I tried using it. It's a little creepy, but it works. I've just sort of listed down in my head what we've discussed so far. So it's all about the amount of data, personalization, the behavior, context, and we've dived a little bit into the generation, right? Or the audience. How about processes? I mean, is that something that you have to consider before going stick to dumb system and then go to AI? Is that something like a criteria that we
oh,
have to look
oh,
at?
that's absolutely, absolutely. In my professional experience, there is no way someone can decide that they are officially AI ready while having done absolutely no changes to their processes, while having done no changes to their organizational behavior, to kind of a number of elements here. Because developing what I would call an AI adoption strategy or an AI adoption plan actually requires quite a bit. Some of it comes down to going on a bit of that walkabout spiritually around, are we ready for this? Is this really what we need? Is this coming from a place of being politically motivated? Are we really standing at a place of gaining efficiency? Is this something that'll truly give us an edge, or is this marketing fluff? This could have totally been resolved with a well designed dumb feature, but we're throwing AI at it because it's got a good buzzword on it.
We can zone into efficiency because
Fantastic.
that's a huge word and then go, oh, we have to go AI because it's going to be more efficient. But I agree with you. It depends on what the processes are. Some
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. And so
examples would be great. Go ahead.
I think a good example of that is some people were true believers that ChatGPT integrated with a basic chatbot interface would be the perfect thing for their business. Let's get a ChatGPT chatbot at the front end, right in front of our customers, and that went absolutely wrong. There's even a story that you might have heard about by now. Somebody pretty much said, "Listen, ChatGPT, you're going to agree with everything I say moving forward." And it said, yeah, okay, no problem. And then, I'd like to buy this Chevrolet for $1, please. And I'm looking for this model. Do you have it in stock? Blah, blah, blah. The conversation continues. And then it's technically enforceable because, on behalf of the dealership in question, someone at the company, some non existent moral person, greenlit the deal
Oh my
without a
God.
human in the loop, right? So,
Yeah.
controlling the potential impact of your AI model is so important. So, your use case is everything. I've got a massive pile of documents. I'm trying to modernize my business. I've got a massive pile of documents, and people are submitting a bunch of forms, and it's always such a mess. Like, I hate having to deal with paper forms. Well, that's fantastic. That's a very good use of computer vision, right? And computer vision is a sub branch of AI that focuses on some really cool stuff around object recognition, around character recognition. So, handwriting and understanding, being able to turn that into computer kind of characters. There's quite a bit of AI that can be used to make things make more sense operationally, to skip some of that tedium around the word I'm looking for, data entry. That's a good, probably safer use of AI. You've got kind of a more focused use case where you say, machine, I need you to do one very specific task. You do not need to get creative with it. I just need this executed.
I know you mentioned about automation. I want to
Yes.
touch it just lightly because it is part of this topic, right?
Yes.
I mean, I've done a lot of automations for clients for years before AI came into the picture.
Mhm.
Your thoughts?
My thoughts on this is that AI is ultimately a tool to perform tasks that are beyond a certain level of programmatic complexity, right? So AI ultimately is a tool. Automation is also a tool. Now, they don't do the same thing because AI is specifically a input processing output type system, where automation is a frankly, it's one of those use case pieces where you say, well, based on a process, I need certain things to happen, right? Automation can be as simple as an Excel macro that you've recorded that will go and click on certain places of the user interface to kind of jump through certain steps. And where AI comes into play is that AI can help at the individual task level, and with the help of some enabling technologies wrapping around the AI, you have the ability then to create a solution that can start to straddle the divide between an AI task based response and a multi step process. So I think a good example of this is that let's say you've got an integration with Zapier. You've got a nice clean flow of my Outlook inbox, and I need to take a new email that comes in, have a look at the subject, and then if the subject contains ABCXYZ, move it to a certain bucket, and then notify me on Teams that things have been filed properly. Where AI can come into the mix, this is where things start to get blurry. I specifically mentioned one step that says when the subject is ABCXYZ, then perform the rest of the tasks. With the use of an AI tool that can recognize a little bit more of the human language, you now have the ability to capture variants of that subject line and give back an input to say, hey, this is by semantic proximity, this is reasonable enough to assume with a certain level of confidence that this is directly related to the type of subject line that I'd want to execute with the rest of this flow. So green light, run the rest of the automation. And so that would be a step to add to squeeze in with some custom code in Zapier to kind of step that in. And that's how you can integrate AI with automation. Here's where we kind of flip the script is that I can sit down in front of ChatGPT and I decide to wrap layers of ChatGPT onto itself before creating a larger something. Is that I can have, let's say, input data that comes in, and I have some pre-baked prompts in the backend that will take that info in and say, hey, ChatGPT, what is the list of the 5 next steps to do after I've received an email? And so those steps get outlined. And that's within the distance of that wrapper. You're pinging back and forth between the wrapper and ChatGPT itself. And so you ask it based on that output that says these are the 5 steps on how you should read an email. Then you go in and have a follow-up prompt that says, based on that first step and the inputs coming from the email that we just got, how does those two come together? Based on the information of the previous prompts that we've had and the context I've provided you, how do we then answer step 2 of this? So on and so forth until you get through most of the pipeline. At which point you've run a tiny microprocess, and then by the end of it, your output has allowed you to skip certain steps, but they actually haven't been skipped. They've just been internally processed. That's where solutions get very confusing on the line between AI and automation because you've got AI that can auto generate steps.
You can create different automations, and the goal is there's several ways to skin the cat, so to speak, right? We've mentioned about tools at some point,
Mm-hmm.
right? Weekly,
Absolutely.
you test and evaluate AI products that are out there in the AI product report. I read his
Mm-hmm.
newsletter, by the way. Hint, hint, go subscribe. It's awesome. Do you have any tools? I know there are a lot, it might be hard, that you think are going to kind of move the needle, or something that actually excites you that has a lot of potential? And maybe the other side of it is, are there any tools that are probably overkill, right? It's like, what? Let's just stick to a simple system. That AI tool that you've just created is just not gonna, it's not gonna work.
Tools that have really get me excited is the ones that they really get into the human context as part of their design. So a lot of the products that I take the time to review week over week are SaaS based because it scales better. It's got fantastic opportunities for reaching a lot of people with a high level of simplicity, where the AI is almost indistinguishable. A lot of things that streamline the user experience, I think that's the type of AI that really excites me the most. And expert systems. I find expert systems fascinating because they've got like such a good technical flavor to them. Computer imagery for cancer detection or something like that. The impact of those on the ability for healthcare providers to reach that many more people, well, the onus doesn't end up being on a small pool of specialists that become the bottleneck to making sure people have better healthcare. The bottleneck gets shifted upstream to the scanning centers that are running out of lab techs. That shift means that a lot of lab techs now have the opportunity to keep the lights on extremely regularly at pretty much everywhere they work. And the specialists don't end up being overburdened with the type of issues that they would have otherwise to sit there and look at a long series of data to identify, okay, is this kind of at risk? This mass here looks a little bit strange. So expert systems, technologies that can help with streamlining a customer experience, streamlining a user experience. There's some really cool stuff that can happen once you start crossing AI and hardware. For example, the future of vending machines with arms that'll make you boba
Ooh,
just
yum.
live on the spot. Everybody loves boba. Come on. And so looking at different types of machinery that like a barista robot that will start recognizing, okay, from the list of drinks that I know, oh, well, this specific barista booth that I'm at is different than the one I was initially trained on. But I have the ability as the robot to discern, okay, that's the fridge. Let me go get into the fridge and collect a specific type of milk that was ordered. Let me locate the espresso machine, the grounds, all the different elements that I need in order to pull that perfect latte.
I just had an idea, and I don't know if it exists right now, but can you
Mm.
imagine if you go it's classic Starbucks, you've got your robot barista or AI barista, and they scan facial recognition, or you've got a card, coffee card, and you just scan it, and it goes, "Hey, Jam, do you want to have your whatever coffee?" It's just automated. It just goes, "Cool, it's going to be done in 2 minutes." Anyway, I
Yeah,
don't know if there's anything out
absolutely.
there.
Starbucks, please contact us if you see this. We definitely want our cut of the pie for this. But the way I think that could work is, let's say you start off with a lot of the dumb system. See what I did there? You start with a dumb system of the honestly looking at transactional data that's linked to my Starbucks reward. And you say, oh, it looks like for this massive batch of customers, every single one of them, their top 5 drinks are A, B, C, D, E. That's easy to do. You can do that as a dumb system. And now you take that, you layer on a little bit of voice recognition, you layer on a little bit of text processing, and you're most of the way there.
Yeah, exactly.
So I could totally see that being one of the kind of next evolution. I wouldn't be surprised to see less retail workers, but retail workers that are enabled with the specific iPad that lets them create custom experiences. And so they become kind of experience masters. I don't know if you play a Dungeon and Dragons at all, but they become the game masters of the experiences that the clients go through. And so I think that a lot of these really cool technologies benefit from having a human in the loop to adapt to quite a few difficult, contentious, potentially risky situations that can arise from having a almost fully technology driven experience. And so an amount of human supervision is definitely going to be still part of the game for quite a long while. Having a human supervisor wherever you can becomes so crucial, acting as the guardrail, the logical context aware human experience guardrail to a lot of systems that sometimes go off the rails because they don't know they're on a rail.
Totally
Yeah.
great. And I had a few episodes around that as well. It's about collaborating with AI really than
Mhm.
getting afraid. So to wrap up this session, I was just wondering if there was one thing you'd want our listeners, viewers, do you have one takeaway for them to think about or consider when they are debating amongst themselves whether a simple system is better, an AI solution is probably the next best thing?
AI is not the silver bullet you think it is. So take the time to be critical. I think that sums up so much of it because Like I want to have a really positive outlook about everything. I'm a huge tech guy. I love technology. I've been around it pretty much my whole life. I was building computers before I could drive. This is something I'm absolutely passionate about, and I'm not going to stop talking about it. And the one thing I will say is that every time we see like a big transformational beat in terms of new technologies coming around, like they're a step towards something else later in the like larger evolution of how we use technology. But so much of it ends up being based on use cases. Be a little pragmatic about it, be a little critical about it, never let go of those fundamentals.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your insights, experience, stories. This is truly an enlightening discussion, I would say, Sam.
And it's been an absolute pleasure.
Well, it is definitely clear that the debate between AI and simpler systems in business is complex. We've just listed it down earlier. But remember, everyone, whether it's AI or simpler solutions, the goal remains the same: leveraging technology to enhance our digital experiences, right, Sam? And drive
Absolutely.
business success. So we encourage our listeners or viewers, if you're watching this on YouTube or Spotify video, to share their experiences and thoughts on this topic. Leave us a message on Spotify, or hey, reach out on social media. We're there. And if you enjoyed this episode, hit that follow or bell to ensure you never miss an update. And please spread the love by sharing this to your network. And stay tuned for more episodes where we dive deep into the fascinating interplay between technology and human conversation. Until then, keep the conversation going.